wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football. Hey Seahawks fans, welcome back to our midweek show of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. How you doing, man?
Doing all right. It's weird. We're through 2 weeks, and we've got this midweek show, and the Seahawks look so bad on Sunday that I want to talk about the draft and draft order and that kind of stuff. We're only 2 weeks into the season, so let's not write this team off completely at this point, but at the same time, we know that our listeners and Seahawks fans in general are looking ahead to who can we get for a quarterback? Who's available?
Yeah, it's one of those deals. It's going to be the ongoing conversation of the year, really. Geno Smith's completing over 80% of his passes. He's currently the 5th ranked Pro Football Focus quarterback in the NFL, and it really doesn't mean anything. Those things aren't reflective of reality, and the reality is we're not doing anything on offense. A lot of that can be attributed to some blocking issues up front, especially in the middle of the offensive line, and then just being ineffective on third down conversions, and our defense not being able to get off the ball or get off the field all contributes to this idea that the offense is just not as efficient as you want it to be.
Well, it's not, the offense isn't good. There was one point late in the third quarter when I did the math, and Geno Smith was averaging 4.5 yards per pass attempt. I think he ended up getting it up in like 6.8 or something like that by the end of the game. But if you're not up over 7.5, you're not playing quarterback well in the NFL. And
historically, he's been like this.
Yeah, he's never had a good yards per attempt, or net yards per attempt, or any of the other more advanced metrics that attempt to account for the different aspects of quarterback play. He's never been good, so it's just hard. And I think Geno is also old. He's 34. This is his last opportunity. He isn't a long-term solution for Seattle. This is he's not under contract for next year. This is literally
neither is Drew Lock.
Yeah, this is his one chance to try and prove that he belongs. And so far, I don't know. I don't believe, at least to me, he's not proving it. Other people disagree. I get that, but I don't see it.
Yeah. You can, again, completion percentage isn't the only stat you have to look at here when evaluating a quarterback. And that can be a little deceiving. And, as the year goes on, we'll see. We'll be one of the lowest scoring offenses in the NFL. And there's a reason for that. It's not all on, the lack of running game or, et cetera. So what we thought we'd do in the midweek show, at least going forward, at least have a segment or two along the way, is evaluate where we are positioned in the NFL draft compared to other teams that specifically might need a quarterback. And so we're going to be looking at probably the top 10 of the NFL draft and teams that are going to be in that conversation, as well as taking a look at some of the quarterbacks that are available coming up in the NFL draft and kind of ranking those or kind of keeping track of who's likely to go first, second, third. Are the Seahawks going to be in a position to take advantage of this quarterback class, or will they solve that problem and look somewhere else in the draft? We'll find out. Mm-hmm. So how do you want to get started?
Well, I was just going to say, let's start with the 0-2 teams, because there's 6 of them currently. And honestly, some of them are surprising. So of the teams that are 0-2, like you look at this and you go, one is the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati was a Super Bowl team last year. Then they appeared to have improved their offensive line. That has not come to fruition so far. But before the year started, people were talking about them as, one of those elite teams that had a chance to go to the Super Bowl again. And they're currently 0-2, and they can't protect Joe Burrow.
Yeah. But they don't need a quarterback.
No, they don't.
They need quite a few different things. I think that 0-2 record is a bad start for them, but I don't think it's going to be reflective of where they end up overall. We'll find out. But Joe Burrow's there. They're not going to be looking for a quarterback. Derek Carr, again, the Raiders are 0-2. Derek Carr's there. They just signed him to a new contract this offseason. He's not going to go anywhere. They'll likely look at other reasons why they're 0-2. And if they end up being very poor, a top 10 offensive, top 10 team in the NFL draft, they'll likely look at a different position group, I would think.
Yeah. And then if you look at the AFC South, you've got one team that's 0-2. That's the Titans. They were the number 1 overall seed in the AFC last year, and they've looked abysmal. I mean, their negative 35-point differential, I believe, is the worst in the NFL. And they would definitely want a quarterback if they're in position to get one. I mean, Tannehill is not a long-term answer, I don't believe, for them. And in their same division, you have the Colts, which are 0-1-1.
You got to remember, and the
Texans
too,
that are 0-1-1.
The Titans did draft Malik Willis last year. Now, granted, he isn't wasn't considered a first-round draft pick last year, but he needed some time to develop. We don't know for sure where he's at in that equation, but that could be something that they look at next year as they evaluate that. Do you know where Ryan Tannehill is on contract status?
No. I know that he
I don't
is
either.
as far as cap hits, he has the highest cap hit of any quarterback in the league right now. And that right there will tell you something about why the Titans are 0-2. And so, yeah, there's that. But yeah, you've got the Texans and the Colts that are also 0-1-1 because they tied week 1. And these teams also haven't looked good. And both of them could use a quarterback. I mean, it depends on where you are at with Davis Mills in Houston, but
well, Davis Mills last week was 19-38 for 177 yards, but he didn't throw a touchdown, didn't have an interception, and they faced off against the Broncos and lost that game. And so it's tough because I think they want to give this kid an opportunity. I think overall he's doing okay, but they have the same anemic sort of problem the Seahawks have. And so it really depends on how they finish. I mean, but that's definitely going to be a team that's probably going to be looking at the top of the draft next year.
I do find it interesting. First place in that division, Jacksonville Jaguars. They're the only team with a win.
Yeah. Right? It's funny that the top of the season in the NFL, a lot of teams, figure things out as you go. But if you start 0-2 or 1-1 and then you drop another game, things get sideways pretty quickly in the NFL. So we'll have to keep track of that.
So that's the AFC as far as teams with no wins. You look over to the NFC and there's the Panthers and Falcons are the only two
teams that we expected to be in this position.
Yep. And we did. And we expect them to draft a quarterback. And so the Seahawks play the Panthers this coming week. Not the Panthers. They play the Falcons this coming week with an opportunity to lose and jump the Falcons in the draft order. It's also a chance for them to win because the Falcons are definitely a beatable team. And I think it's going to be an interesting game this week, but we'll leave the preview of that till our third show.
It's hard to imagine, I would assume, for both fans of both teams to imagine their teams winning this game. It could just come down to who wants to lose the worst, because it's just one of those deals where you show up and who knows what's going to happen. I think Seattle can come alive. Seattle has more talent overall than the Falcons, but like you said, we'll get to that.
Interesting thing about those two teams is even though they're 0-2, their net points are for both teams is -5. So they've lost 2 games within a field goal. Which I mean, it means they've been competitive. You look at Seattle, which is 1-1. They've won a game, and their net points is -19. So yeah,
Yep.
they beat Denver, but they were not even in the game whatsoever against the 49ers.
Yeah, and that's when I look at these early schedule results, it's you've got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But Seattle to me is like a bottom 3 team right now, just based on performance on the field. Now you take a look at that Denver game; they were close to scoring 2 times. We punched the ball out; that was the difference in the game. But if those are scored, which happens 98% of the time, Seattle loses that game. We're 0-2. You look at the point differential. You look at the amount of time difference on the field, and it's abysmal right now. But we'll see. Seattle could come alive, and we could have a different conversation after these next 2 games. But let's talk about there's also a bunch of 1-on-1 teams, and let's really focus on who actually needs a quarterback, because obviously we're not looking at the Joe Burrow 0-2 Bengals and possibly the Titans. We don't know exactly what Tannehill's happening there. Statistically, I think Tannehill looks like he's having a pretty decent season so far. So we'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, Tannehill's not the problem. He's not the biggest problem. He's never been, Aaron Rodgers, but he is definitely not the biggest problem in Tennessee. I would say Derrick Henry in that running game, averaging 2.5 yards per attempt, is the much more concerning issue in Tennessee. But
so I've got a total of 10 teams that I've kind of identified as potentially needing quarterbacks out of this drafts, at least so far, based on the current data that we've got. I'll start with the Washington Commanders. Carson Wentz. He solved the problem initially for them. They look like maybe they would be back in this quarterback hunt, but he's actually doing okay. 30 of 46, 337 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the interception against the Lions. Ended up losing that game. The Lions are interesting because there's another team on my list here with Jared Goff as quarterback, but Jared Goff is also doing well. 20 of 34, 256 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions against the Commanders. So they may feel like he's not necessarily the problem, and they have other holes that they want to plug. It's really going to come down to that, I think, for the Lions. And then you look at New York Giants. Daniel Jones kind of outperforming themselves, really. They're 2-0. Daniel Jones is 22 and 34, 176 yards and a touchdown in the last game versus the Panthers, a win. And then there's the Seattle Seahawks. Geno Smith, 24, 30, 197 yards in the last outing, no touchdowns, 1 interception. They're 1-1. To me, the most quarterback needy team in the NFL as I go through this list. Saints, Jameis Winston. And then you can interrupt me after this. 25 of 40, 236, touchdown, 3 interceptions versus the Bucs. They're 0 and they're 1-1. So a little disappointing there.
And then the Panthers and Falcons, both.
And the Panthers and Falcons. Baker Mayfield with the Panthers, 14 of 29, 145 yards, a touchdown, no interceptions versus the Giants. Giants beat them in a 1-point game. So, yeah, it's crazy. And then you look at the Colts. Colts don't have any defense, but they hired Matt Ryan to kind of do something with the offense. The offense is anemic too. Matt Ryan finished 16 of 30, 195 yards, 3 interceptions versus the Jaguars. But their defense is abysmal.
Yeah, the defense was supposed to be good. The offensive line is supposed to be good. The running game is supposed to be good. I mean, these are the things that the Colts were built on, and why they were a contender last year until Carson Wentz melted down at the end of the year. Those things shouldn't have changed. You just get Matt Ryan in there instead of Carson Wentz, and you're like, hey, this is a better team. But the defense just has done nothing.
Yeah, they can't get to the quarterback. They have no pass rush. They can't stop the run.
Yeah, it's weird getting off the field because it's mostly the same players that were really good last year, and now they're just not. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that team. They don't appear to be going anywhere. That division just in general, the entire AFC South is like a race to the bottom.
Agreed. And
the
the Falcons too. You know, you go to the NFC South. The Falcons with Marcus Mariota is another team that we're going to be watching. We're playing them this week. See, have a firsthand look as to where they stand in this competition for the number one pick and the number one overall quarterback taken in the draft. But Marcus Mariota's two touchdowns, 2 interceptions in the last game versus the Rams. They almost beat the Rams. So what are your thoughts overall? You know, this is kind of the same list that I had in my head in the preseason. Now these teams are kind of underperforming. Who really needs a quarterback as much as the Seattle Seahawks?
Well, I mean, the Falcons have Ryan, the Panthers have Baker Mayfield. They would prefer to get a nice, a young franchise quarterback, but to say that they need it more than Seattle, I wouldn't agree with that. You look at the Commanders, they have Carson Wentz. He's not good. He's played better, but he did this last year. He played okay early in the year, and then he just completely failed. Down the stretch. You just kind of go through the teams, right? There.
What do you think of the Joe Flacco led Jets?
Well, the Jets, he's still Joe Flacco, and they've got Zach Wilson if he ever gets healthy to continue.
Joe Flacco had 4 touchdowns against the Browns. That's crazy.
Yes, he did. The Browns looked bad on defense.
Really, but as bad as the Browns are right now, they've got their quarterback of the future on their roster. So,
he's just suspended. To me, it comes down to I really think because Seattle doesn't have an answer at quarterback. Geno Smith isn't an answer. Drew Lock's not an answer. The Titans have Tannehill. Would they like to move on and get a young franchise quarterback? Yes, but if they don't, they know they can continue to build their team through defense and the running game and continue to win. The Colts have Matt Ryan, same idea. The Texans, I think they are going to come out of this year believing that they need a quarterback and that Davis Mills is not going to play well enough to keep his job. So, I mean, there's some of that, but he's at least a young player who has shown, some flashes. He just needs if he develops and gets better throughout the season. Maybe they go, let's give him one more year.
Or give him some better protection, or give him some, another weapon.
Seattle is the team that looks that looks just hopeless at quarterback. And that's really hard to say.
I agree. I was going to say the Lions with Jared Goff would be the obvious choice, because the Lions are building a roster that's going to be ready-made to start winning. If not this year, next year. And if Jared Goff and the contract situation there and the draft, and if they have another top 10 pick, they might choose to go that direction. But then again, if Jared Goff's playing the way that he is and they're winning games, they could go in a different direction for sure.
Yeah. Dan Campbell's doing such a good job there.
So what do you think of the quarterbacks that are available? Okay, I haven't been completely impressed yet. I will say this. I look at this as being the CJ Stroud show and then everyone else, because CJ Stroud, while he hasn't just completely taken off, they haven't really played their meaningful games yet. But CJ Stroud's numbers, if you look at him closely, he's ahead of where he was last year. And I think that, a 6'3", 218 quarterback at Ohio State playing meaningful games, 73% completion percentage, 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions so far this year. He's my number one guy.
Oh, absolutely. He's the number one guy. And he's probably the first overall pick of the draft. Unless a team like Jacksonville that's got their quarterback lands in that spot. And then that you take the guy from the
Will Anderson.
Yeah. But CJ Stroud's almost certainly there. He's just everything that you'd want out of a quarterback in today's NFL. Bryce Young has played well. He continues to be in that top 5 conversation. But as you pointed out right before we hit record, 6 foot, 190 pounds. He's a little guy. He isn't the little guy who has the super mobility of Kyler Murray. And so that may scare off some teams. And that's why I think no matter how well Young plays, Stroud's going to be the first overall pick. And then the other guy with a first round grade to me is Will Levis, the quarterback out of Kentucky. But
Yes.
statistically, he's not going to get anyone excited. But his offensive line is terrible, and they don't have a lot of weapons around him. He is literally their offense. And that's not a good place to be, especially when you're at a school like Kentucky.
Yeah.
But he's
still at 65% completion percentage, but he does have 4 interceptions as well to go along with 6 touchdowns. So that's kind of something to watch, something to monitor, I think.
It is. And then after that, I think at that point you're starting to reach Anthony Richardson out of Florida has had some problems. He's looked
More
good
than
and
problems.
athletic.
Yes.
Tyler Van Dyke out of Miami, another guy that I don't think will stay in the conversation. The guy that intrigues me that I need to see more of is Tanner Mcgee. That's Mckee, not Mcgee. No G. It's got a K. Out of Stanford, and he looks like a guy who may start creeping up draft boards. The more tape there is out there on him.
Yeah. There's a few guys, a few young guys. I agree. Tanner Mckee from Stanford is an interesting name. There's been some good play from quite a few different quarterbacks that are in that second to third tier. Quarterbacks that are going to be available in the second to third, fourth round. Those are difficult evaluations for the Seahawks because you're going to want a guy to come in right away, I think, if you're Seattle. And if you're picking a guy in the second, third round, those guys are typically not quite ready to step in and help your team right away. So
the Russell Wilsons are very rare, where they come in, a third round pick comes in and is the guy. That's just not what historical NFL data tells you is possible.
Watch names though, like Jaron Hall out of BYU. He's kind of a fun guy to watch.
Isn't he 27?
Probably.
No, and that's not even an exaggeration. I'm not like, it's not like my thing when I talk about Aaron Rodgers and say he just turned 80.
I'll look that up. That's funny though.
But no, he's been around forever. I swear his first year there was 2017.
Age 24.
Okay, so he'll be 25.
Not as bad as
at draft time. It's not as bad as I thought, but he's really old for a draft prospect. He's like Brandon Whedon, if you remember.
Yeah, and you go on, a 2-year mission when you're at BYU, and so that's part of the equation there for sure. But fun quarterback, to look at. Who else is up?
KJ Jefferson out of Arkansas.
Yeah. How about Michael Penix Jr. out of Washington, or the kid from Washington State? They've been both having excellent numbers so far.
I just tell you, Cameron Ward out of Washington State is going to be interesting. I don't think he is an NFL quarterback at this point. He is got the size and the athleticism and the arm, and he's really toolsy. But even at college level, it looks like the game right now is moving really fast for him, and he needs everything to slow down. I think of him more as like a pretty major project at this point. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. It's just something to monitor. I mean, it's still so early in this process, especially for quarterbacks. I think that you got to have more data to work with, and just hasn't been enough games. I really like Will Levis from Kentucky. I do. I understand the competition level there, the inferiority of his offensive line, lack of weapons that some of the other quarterbacks have at the top of this class. And can you evaluate through that? Can you identify the traits that you're looking for, the competitive toughness and all that kind of thing, the grit that the Seahawks really emphasize? How do they evaluate quarterbacks? It's been a while, Keith, since we've seen Seattle have to really go deep and evaluate quarterbacks at the top end of the draft. It's just something that we're not used to. And I don't know exactly what they're looking for, to be completely honest. They had Russell Wilson, a 5'10" guy that's super athletic and kind of unstructured. And then are they going to go the way that Pete Carroll used to go at USC? And and get like a Carson Palmer guy.
Yeah. And I think what you're going to see is somewhere in between. They want someone who can do some of the Russell Wilson things and, win off schedule, but they also want someone willing to play on schedule, which Wilson kind of showed that he wasn't. He wanted every play to be, an opportunity to throw it deep. So it does, it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, we'll see. We'll see where they go, but I think they're going to want someone who can win off schedule, but is willing to play within the offense more than Wilson was willing to.
So if you had to guess, I mean, if all three quarterbacks that we've talked about at the top, Bryce Young, Will Levis, CJ Stroud, were available to the Seahawks in the draft, which direction do you think that they would go?
Oh, they'd take Stroud. Stroud's the more sure thing of the three of them. And I don't think they'd think twice about it.
Interesting. So let me ask you this. So we're in the middle of the week. We came off a really bad loss. I haven't heard too much yet on injuries, updates, and so forth. That'll be meaningful as we move towards Sunday. But what are your feelings on this team so far? Just kind of having stepped back away from the game a little bit and kind of allowed some time to come in, and just kind of what are your overall impressions so far?
Honestly, the defense is worse than I expected. And that's
where at on the defense?
Well, I expected Darrell Taylor to be better, specifically him. I expected the defensive line to be better. And I mean, that's really where it comes to me. The run defense just hasn't been there. But that's very true.
And the tackling, just poor tackling, out of position. That I think you're seeing a lot of credit go to Brooks and Cody Barton, but the play just hasn't lived up to the hype yet. We'll see if it all comes together. They obviously need players in front of them to play well as well, defending the run. I'm not exactly sure if we've got those in place, to be completely honest. It looks like we're lacking some edge setters. I was hoping, in the offseason, when you looked at how this thing would kind of lay out, a player like LJ Collier might have a great camp and come through and be able to, play on the edge there and stop the run a little bit for them. Now you've got players like Quentin Jefferson, for example, that are playing out there quite a bit, and he's just not quite that player. And then you've got Taylor behind him missing tackles, and teams are kind of running all over us right now. I think Woods and Ford are doing okay in the middle, especially Woods, but we need more than that.
Yeah, Woods has been him and Nuwasu have been the two guys in the front seven that have been truly good. Brooks and Barton, as you said, they're making a lot of tackles, and they're going to continue to make a ton of tackles, but they need to maybe making more of those tackles up, at the line of scrimmage or, within the first couple yards, not 7 yards downfield. And to do that, they've got to get off blocks better. And we'll see how that progresses throughout the year. But yeah, I mean, it's the front seven just hasn't lived up to expectations. Been really unimpressed with Quentin Jefferson, of all people. And that's really disappointing.
He's been able to affect the pocket a little bit, but defending the run, it's been really hard.
Yeah, it hasn't been good, and that's one of the things he needs to do.
On the trenches on the other side have been difficult as well. Obviously, we've got two rookie offensive tackles. That's one issue, but inside, Jackson at the right guard position has just been horrible so far in the offense, with a very abysmal run grade, and just kind of allowing pressures and sacks to come through him as well. So he's had the worst grade so far on the offensive line by a mile. And I'm wondering if the team will pivot as soon as this week to a guy like Jake Curhan, who didn't even suit up this last game.
Yeah, that was weird. It really was. that, I mean, I understand it a little bit because you've got your interior guy, your guard, in Phil Haynes, who is available since both the starters were back in there. And then you've got Forsyth, who can play right and left side, whereas Curhan's more of a just the right side at tackle. But he's been consistently your fourth best offensive lineman. And now he's not playing because of the position. And so getting him active, getting him on the field, I mean, you got to do that at some point. If it involves moving other people around to get him in at right guard, I think you need to do it.
Yeah. Also, Austin Blythe is just getting shoved back on run blocking as well. So something to watch. We don't have an adequate replacement on the roster there,
problem.
But
yeah,
I'd like to, kind of pay attention to that, because we do need to be able to run the ball effectively. If we're going to have any chance at all at scoring points this year, we have to get that thing going. So, all right. I think that's going to wrap it up, Keith. We'll come back tomorrow and figure out a pregame look at the Atlanta Falcons coming into town on Sunday, and find a way. Maybe you and I can come up with a game plan that will work to beat this team. I don't know.
They're a beatable team, and they're a beatable team.
They're a beatable team. They are.
They are a beatable team for Seattle with the current state of the roster. This isn't like, oh, they're a beatable team if Seattle could win this game. And I honestly believe that. And so we'll look at what they have to do in order to get there. And get
I agree. This is definitely a winnable game. I think both of us had it on our prediction shows as wins. And so we'll see. I'm hoping for the best. All right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NWC Hawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. Seahawksplaybook.com is the website, and find us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube, and hit that subscribe button. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWC Hawk. Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at Seahawksplaybook.com.